Welcome to Business Mastery with Don Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about hiring, training, and retaining. And from our previous conversations, we're going to talk basically about people issues in disguise in your business that can affect you and what you do next. So I have Mike here to talk to us all about it. He's an author, to tell us everything we need to know. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Don. Good, glad to be here.
All right. Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Sure. So again, Mike Matalone. I'm the founder of the XP3 Talent System, which is a kind of a scientific methodology for implementing a people operating system within an organization. So in essence, we help companies build high performing teams. So we've worked across many industries all throughout the U.S., Canada. The last few years, a large part of our focus has been in the construction world. So,
All right.
and part of that is because I also own another company that is a deck building company here in Virginia where I live.
Right. So you are an operator as well as somebody who does all of the things. I think it's important to point out that,
Yep.
it's like we're eating our own lunch. We're taking our own medicine over here with what we're doing. I think it's important to say that. So let's start with just the people system. I hear it already from a couple of people who are like, people are not systems. People are not systems. We're supposed to, we shouldn't be treating the human side and the resource side as a system. And I can hear that resistance coming up because I know the first early years on, I had the same response to a lot of things where no, that's not the culture we do here, right? So let's address the elephant in the room.
Yep, sure. So I learned years ago, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, and hopefully many of your listeners are, and if not, pay attention. This is important. But scale a company consistently, successfully, profitably, you have to have systems and processes for all critical components of the organization, right? So marketing system to generate the lead, sales systems to close it, production systems to deliver your services, financial systems, right? How you do things. And in the contracting world, I'd like to put the context in there, like you wouldn't go build a home, right, and reinvent the wheel every time you do it, right? You have a proven system you follow that works, right? And that applies to everything I just said. How do you generate the marketing leads? How do you sell? And so on. So what I've learned, though, is that the reason those systems don't work as effectively as most entrepreneurs would like them to is because they're dependent on the people to execute on those systems, right? Which means then what or kind of comes back to the question, rather, why don't you have a system for your people? And it's not that people are systems, it's a system for how do you hire people effectively, as opposed to, letting each manager who's hiring their own people take their own approach, or at which most of them it's subjective, shooting from the hip. I like you, I don't like you. Why, when you onboard and train people for both initially and as well as ongoing development, right? Again, systematize that, and that your ability to train people will go up more significantly. And then how do you actually manage them day to day and make sure those people stick around and keep performing? Again, there are systems to how you do that. That is what the XP3 Talent System is that I built. It's a full life cycle of the employee from the moment you hire them till the moment they leave, on how to do everything much more effectively. And therefore, then the other systems you have start working for you the way that they were designed to, and you get better, quicker results.
So this goes back to the idea that it's possibly a people problem in disguise if something's not working in your business.
Yes.
It may not be the other systems themselves. It may be the execution of those systems by maybe the wrong people or people who maybe need more training. Just sort of that approach.
Yeah. So when we first spoke, Don, you remember I told you, and for the audience, a little background. Back in the early 2000s, I was an executive coach facilitator for Vistage International. If you're not familiar, Vistage is the world's oldest, largest CEO membership organization, about a dozen CEOs in each group. once a month come together to bring their different challenges and stuff and have the group help them to solve it, right? So kind of a unofficial board of advisor, great program. So I ran 3 groups for 5 years. I was actually a member prior to that too for a couple of years. So every month, listening to all these different issues people would bring to the table, and they would present it as maybe a financial problem, right? Or a marketing problem or production problem, right? And our process was to ask clarifying questions, right? Seek first to understand before being understood and given your recommendations. And then through that process, my job as the facilitator would be to ask the other members, say, hey, Dawn just presented this financial problem she has, right? Based on her answers to your questions around digging deep around the problem, do you still think that she has a, cash flow problem as she presented, or is there something else deeper there? Right. And probably 7 out of 10 times they'd say, no, it's a different issue. And what we'd identify, they said, Don, the reason you got the cash flow problems is because the person you have managing the cash doesn't have the skill set required to do it effectively. So is it a cash flow problem that's really the root of we're solving, or is it the person who's managing that? Which kind of goes back to what I just said about you can have the best financial system, but unless you got somebody really good who knows how to work that system, it's only as good as the people using it. So,
Yeah. So the next question pulling that thread is if you discover it truly is a people problem. Again, separating this idea of I like them, they're great personality or whatever. Maybe they're a culture fit, maybe not a another fit. Can we kind of investigate that a little bit because I'm sure everybody listening probably has at least one business problem that may be tied to somebody.
mhm. Sure. So where do you want to go? Where do you want to start?
Well, let's just start from the moment that it's an aha and you're like, "No, I think it might be related to the person, the human that's sitting in the chair."
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do we go from there? Because that can be a very sticky place to be, especially if they've been with you for a long time, or maybe they've come up through the ranks,
Right.
and you realize it's somebody, and you're like, "Oh, it is actually that person." That can be a very sticky place, I think, to have a realization.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess this kind of makes me think of the number one reason we've identified, over the years why people aren't as successful as they should be, could be, or even want to be, right? 'Cause, right, everybody comes into it wanting to succeed. Well, the reason that they're usually not is because managers typically are not very good at defining success for their employees. And that's kind of where it all starts to the question you put out there. You have to get clear on what does success look like in that role and granularly looking at it. The more granular you can get on defining success, then the next step to your question is now you have something if you're hiring a new person or assessing an existing staff member, you have something to benchmark against and assess them against. Otherwise, again, you're just being subjective, right? And a lot of times, you probably heard this, dealt with this. I hear this all the time. Managers will say, well, I've got this employee that, is just struggling, not doing real well. I'm thinking about getting rid of them. And I said, well, tell me more. Where are they struggling? And the manager actually struggles to tell me where they're struggling. So if you can't even pinpoint what the problem is, right, then how are you going to solve it? And that goes back to, again, you have to get clear on what those expectations. But in the hiring process, we'll use that for an example, job descriptions, starting there. People think because I wrote a job description, everything's clear. But most job descriptions are so vague, right? And give you an example. Most job descriptions will say something like must be proficient in the Microsoft Office suite, right? So think about that now. You used the term proficient. Well, I would ask you, Don, what's your definition of proficient? And then compare that to maybe what that candidate or that employee's definition of proficient is, right? And they can be two completely different things. So that's an example of using a vague, descriptor. Instead, you say, hey, I need expert level skills. Or if you're willing to train and coach, maybe it's, I just need intermediate level skills. And then what does that actually entail? So, and then go back to the Microsoft suite, right? Well, if you're not aware, there are 11 suites in the
Yes.
Microsoft or I mean, 11 applications in the suite today. Most companies only use 3 or 4 of them, right?
Right.
Most roles may only use 2 or 3, right? Not even the full suite that the company's using. So, again, even if you're an expert in Microsoft Access, right, or what do I care if we don't use it? Right? So we would get granular and define that and say, oh, well, in your job, you're going to use Outlook, PowerPoint, and Microsoft Excel. Right. And Outlook, I don't care if you use it. I could teach you that. Right. That's simple, easy. But let's go back to the financial scenario, right? You need to be an expert in Excel. Well, how do you define an expert in Excel? Right. Well, you should be able to teach a class in it if you're an expert, right? You can create all the formulas. You know how to create all the, charts, Gantt charts, pivot tables, right? There's pretty much nothing in it you can't do. That makes you an expert. Now, what you usually see candidates or employees will say, and particularly on the candidate side, they say, well, Don, I'm an expert. Well, what makes you an expert, Don? Well, because I've been using it for 15 years. And the people go, oh, she must be an expert. Well, in reality, Don, I don't know about you, but I've been using Microsoft Excel ever since it came out without dating myself. But I'm barely an intermediate. I can't create all formulas. I can create the basic ones. I can create a Gantt chart. I've learned how to do that recently. Have no idea how to create a pivot table, and I definitely couldn't teach a class in it. Right. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. Get granular about what success looks like in the role. Um, and we'll kind of pause and see if you got any comments or questions
I
about
I
it.
do, I do, because what this pops up into my head right now as businesses evolve over time. What you may have thought you were hiring for, you come to find out you really aren't using them in that role, or they ended up having strengths in another area. I think
Yeah.
everyone here can probably relate to at least a few of their employees sort of evolving with the business as it goes, especially if they've been there over a couple of years. So just because it's on the job description, or you have the roles and responsibilities or the task list, when they come on, they're onboarded. Sounds to me like we should have that system of review as well. And maybe we should, I guess, as the roles evolve, are we capturing that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because as the company grows, the role's gonna change, Classic example, working with a client right now, just to help them to hire a sales manager, right? They only have 2 salespeople right now, but they wanna add 4 more this year, right? Well, managing 2 salespeople is completely different than managing 6 salespeople.
Right.
That role, that job description is gonna change dramatically, and the bandwidth, and this is where I was gonna go back to too, it's on the clarification. So one of the things we created as part of the talent system is a success formula, right? And we say, so instead of starting with creating a job description with a bunch of vague tasks, write down what you believe some of the success, KPIs are, right? What's going to define success at different intervals? So like, give you let's talk about a project manager, right? And let's say in that for that project manager, you need them to come into your company, learn about your product, services, culture, systems, etc. But then by month 2, I need you out running jobs all by yourself, right? So without any supervision, you need to be able to have that. Well, when you know that, and this is the second part of our formula, first define what results you need. And the second part of that is, when do you need them? What's the time frame? So when I need you running jobs by yourself in 30 days, right? So 30 days is the timeline. That's very different than if you say, no, I got 6 months before I need you out running jobs on your own, right?
Right.
You're going to work side by side with one of our existing PMs. They're going to coach, mentor, train you on everything. And you have at least 6 months before you need to be ready. Well, when you have that understanding, that will completely dictate the level of knowledge and skill that that candidate needs to bring to the table, right? That second scenario, 6 months, they don't need to have half the knowledge and skill set that that person in 30 days needs to bring.
Right.
They already need to know all that stuff. The only thing they're learning is your stuff, how to run the projects. All right, they already know the ins and outs of that. So that would be an example of how you would approach that.
Okay. So the other thing is, when you hear from people, if you're thinking of hiring, it's already late. You should have been thinking about it way before. I have a feeling that there's also a system within your system about the timing of when we need who in what seat. So beyond the definition of what success looks like in the time frame of success, how do we break that backwards even further from, again, just the job role? I think we start from the description because we think we know the help we need. Sounds like, though, we're doing it way out of order to get that sustainable employment or employee in there that is really going to be set up for success from day one.
Yeah. Well, we were just I was kind of touching on it, right? With when you start off the beginning of the year, right, and you put your annual strategy, your plan, your goals together, and you say, "Hey, we're going to double the company this year," right? Right, and that's where, everybody starts with that kind of those big ambitious goals. Say, "Yeah, we're gonna accomplish that," but they don't do what you just said, work the plan backwards. All right, well, what does the company look like at when we double the revenue, right? How many people do we need in different departments and roles to be able to support that size, company? Um, and then you gotta plan back what I said. We say, "Oh, well, if in, 4 months we wanna be at X," right? And then at 8 months we need to be here, right? That can help you to backfill and start figuring out, okay, well then I need someone who can step in, say in month 3, of the year, who's going to start training to be able to execute on that in month 4 or month 5, right? And that's where people don't plan enough around, the details of what it entails to get to those goals. And again, they sometimes will say, well, yeah, and even looking at the systems and processes, tools, right? Well, maybe the systems you have today won't support that. We had a client years ago we were working with when I first met with the owners. They've been in business 9 years. They were doing about 63 million. They were in 4 different markets. They had no leadership team. It was just the 2 owners, right? So
Okay.
one big red flag. It's like they were controlling, running everything, which it meant, you just don't imagine these guys are working 70, 80 hours a week, right? Trying to do it all.
And this was at 60 million. I just wanted to
Yep.
clarify. This is
Yeah,
this is at
60.
60 million with no management layer, no director level, no.
Yep. And then when we started looking at stuff, the I said, well, who's managing your money, right? At 60 million, and he said, oh yeah, we got our accountant, right, or our in-house. I think that's what they called him. I was an accountant. So I said, and what's your accounting system? And they said QuickBooks. So, which to me was a huge red flag. Like, why are you still on QuickBooks at 63 million, right? With 4 different markets. And again, going back a couple of years too, QuickBooks is a little better today than it was then. And it's a great system if you're under, 4 or 5 million, might even get you to 10 or so, effectively. But when you go beyond that, you need more of an enterprise system. So the fact that they were still operating on QuickBooks at 63 million told me that the guy running the financials didn't know what he was doing, you know. But more importantly, then I said, are you getting timely reports, and what reports are you getting and when do you get those? And then again, that was very vague. Well, I get them when I ask for them. And I was like, well, shouldn't you be looking at that some of those things weekly, and some monthly and some quarterly? And so again, no system to their finances, but yet they got to 63 million. Why? They were experts at marketing and sales, right?
Right.
Now, the challenge we ran into and the reason they started talking to me is they had over 80% turnover.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So think about that, and they're actually from like January to June of that year when I met with them in June, they had hired, I think, 230 people and lost 170 of them. So what is that costing that organization at that level? It was at least we were able to pinpoint, up to close to $10 million a year just bleeding out the bottom.
Yeah.
So, but it really came back to, your answer is when you can start assessing, do you have the right people once you know what kind of results are they supposed to be producing? Where should they be at that point when that company is that size?
All right. So now I'm going to tread into a little bit of a shark infested water because as entrepreneurs, we should know the things that we're not really good at as much as the things that are our strengths, right? So it's been encouraged, and I've done it myself, is to hire people better at the things you're really not good at
Yep.
from the beginning. But what this tells me from your past story is they hired somebody who probably was competent at QuickBooks and did really well for a while and didn't realize the company had outgrown the capacity, the infrastructure, and that person's competence.
Yep.
Now I have to ask, shouldn't that person have gone to leadership and say, because they're do you see where I'm going with this? So if you're hiring somebody better than you in a role and they're defining the things, how do you know, or will you know, or is there a process to know that
Yeah.
maybe the company's outgrown or the competencies have not evolved? That to me, hearing that somebody was happily sitting there taking a paycheck
Yeah.
on systems that I would say most financial professionals inside small business would say, "Hey, this is now above our capability. You need projections, you need a CFO, you need forecasts, you need things that we didn't necessarily need a few years ago." Um, that what do we do there? Like, that story just made me go, "Wow, you're encouraged to hire people that know more than you and are better than you at certain things. So how do I know how to set them up for success? Because it
Right.
sounds like this guy probably should have gone to leadership 5 years sooner."
Yeah. So so let me think how I want to keep this concise and answer your question. So as a business owner, right? You're the person in charge. Um, your expertise is no longer like maybe why you started the company, right? But maybe you're an engineer and you were the best engineer, so you started an engineering firm, right? You're a lawyer, right? And you're a really good lawyer, so now I'm going to start my own practice and hire 50 other lawyers, right? Well, being a good lawyer, and of course, then you can get granular, like what kind of lawyer, right? What do you do, Alan? Right?
We
But that
go there.
yeah, but that's different than actually running the business, building and running the business, right? I don't need to be a great litigator in order to know how to build a law firm and scale it and make it profitable, right? I need to know that I need to have really good litigators who are probably better than me at it, right? Or whatever the area of practice is. So understanding first is as a business owner, being an expert in a particular field does not make you a successful entrepreneur. What makes you a successful entrepreneur is understanding all the components of a business. And we like to put them into what we call the five pillars, right? So one is people, right? Do you know how to hire, train, onboard, coach, mentor, everything that goes with people? That's a pillar by itself. Two is leadership topics, which is, do you understand the importance of a culture and why you have to build a succinct culture, which is grounded in your mission, vision, and values? And then why are those so important? How are they constructed? And things like, KPIs do we measure in the different areas? Like those are all different leadership things that would fall under that pillar that the owner now needs to not necessarily be an expert at each one, but you have to have an understanding of these different pillars and how they connect together. So sales and marketing, we kind of put that in a pillar together, right? And all the elements that go with that. Operations, administration stuff, and then of course financials is a pillar by all by itself. So you have to understand all those pieces as an owner. You don't have to be an expert at any of them, but you have to understand the critical importance of them and how they interact together in order to get you the end result. That needs to become your expertise. So how do you get that? Well, you can read, you take training courses, you can join coaching organizations, hire a business coach who knows that. There's a lot of different ways, but that realization is that's my expertise, right? Now, I want to go back to where you started because I wrote a note. You said, you know, we need to know that we need to hire people that are better at it than us, right? Or so that is a kind of a trap all by itself. Because
Right.
what entrepreneurs do is they say, "Oh, I'm the best at this, therefore I should do this." Right? Well, if you're doing that, whatever that is all day, like in your case, right? Hey, I'm the best litigator our practice has, right? Well, if you're in court all day doing that, you're not running the business.
Right.
So the growth of the business is now suffering at the expense of you being a great litigator winning this case. So, right, or you're the best architect, so you're going to be doing all the designs and everything yourself, or you're the best salesperson, so you're going to be out selling all day long, right? Well, then everything else is going to suffer if you're doing that. So But usually we also look at, the problem with that model too is, I'm really good at it, right? You might be great at it, right? And therefore, but what it, rather than looking at what you're good or not good at, what you need to focus a little bit more on is, what do you enjoy doing? Even when you're hiring, you have to take that in the equation. So for example, if you're smart, right, I can train you, you're coachable, right? You can teach most anything to people like that, right? But and you may get really good at it. But that doesn't mean you're going to enjoy doing that work every day. And you can even get granular and break it down into behavioral competencies, right? So the one I like to use as an example in this case is attention to detail, right? There are people who are naturally detailed thinkers, right? Who, and who love getting into the weeds of stuff and figuring stuff out and dot the I's, cross the T's, right? That is their passion to do that. That doesn't mean that because they love it, that they're actually good at it, right? But it's a starting point for getting good, because if you don't love it, you can still get good at it, but you won't be consistent at it, right? And then the flip side of that, and I'm an example of that, I am not one of those people that love the details. I am very good at it in my job, but I'm only good at it for about an hour or two at a time, right? Because I'm more of that big picture strategic kind of thinker, from my brain thought process, there's always a plan B, right? Which is a typical entrepreneurial kind of approach. But I've also learned that sometimes there isn't a plan B. Like I go to the bank for a credit line, right? I've learned it the hard way. The banks don't go by close is good enough, right? They want every penny accounted for. So I now know how to do that. But do I enjoy doing that? Not even the slightest. So so when you're the point I'm trying to make is don't just look at what you or the people you're hiring are good at. You have to make sure it's a combination. Do they know how to do it? That is knowledge and skill, right? And knowledge, you can graduate with a, double master's degree in a topic and, have all the book knowledge. But until you get out in the real world, start applying that, that's the skill set, the experience side, right? So knowledge and skill is the first part of the formula it takes to get consistently good. But really, the glue, the magic sauce, if you will, is making sure that people naturally think and feel and behave in a manner that that task or those type of tasks require. So, like that attention to detail. If you want sort of be consistent, they got to know how to do the details. They have to have experience. Go, oh, when I did it this way, it didn't work out. So now I know I do it this way, it works, right? And sometimes that takes years to develop. And then they have to have that passion, that intrinsic motivation that I love doing the detail work. That formula, those three things, is what gets you a consistently productive employee. So go back to where we started. As the owner, you need to understand that formula and how that works so that you can put the right people in the right roles and not just do it yourself because you like doing it or you're the one who's the best at it.
So let me ask you this. How often do you see people hiring people who are passionate about a particular thing? Like, for example, let's say you're in manufacturing, you need someone who's in QC. Can be boring sometimes, right? Or a little QA or whatever. How do you find those people? Do you put that in the job description? How does your system account for finding the people that actually didn't just go to school for it and they've learned to like it, but the people that you're talking about with the staying power that are going to be, good thinkers, they're going to be, consistent, persistent, follow through, and probably evolve well with the company.
Right.
I don't think I've ever read a job description anywhere that says must love Excel.
Exactly. So you're not going to have that in the job description, or you can put it in a job description. And the problem with that is people go, "Oh yeah, I love it." Right. Well, that doesn't mean they're good at it, or
Right.
it doesn't even mean they actually love it. They just saw that your job description said you must love this, be passionate about this. What you really need to start with more than anything when you're hiring is hiring to your culture. That's where they need to be passionate about, right? So your mission state, and by the way, your culture is grounded in your mission. Why does your company exist? What are you trying to accomplish, right? And then you make sure that you hire to people who have share that passion. That hey, I love what your company does, Don. I want to be a part of that, right? Well, that means then they have to know about what your mission is.
Right.
So your mission statement on your website somewhere, is it in the ads? Right. So, and the mission statement should inspire people to act. Right. If you have an effective mission statement, it's going to inspire them to take action to be good at Excel or whatever it is, right, that they need to do. So that passion starts around that. The vision is the next component, right? Which means, again, you have to have a compelling, simple vision. Say, hey, we are trying to become the best in the industry or whatever that is, the number one dealer in our space, whatever those aspirations are, and again, when over the next 3 years, within 5 years, right? Um, that vision should excite people about the future, but not just for you, right? Like, because, well, as I help Dawn accomplish this for her company, she's going to be able to buy a bigger house, a nicer car, boat, take better vacations. That isn't going to excite me. What's going to excite me is, oh, as I help you achieve that vision, I understand what's in it for me. That means career advancement for me to be able to make more money, take on bigger responsibilities, to learn more things, right? As that company grows, I have this skill set now. I want to advance that, right? So your vision should excite them about the future, what's possible for them as well as you. And then your core values, right? So your core values are the third piece of the puzzle, and your core values need to be able to. You got to make sure that people are in sync with those. That it drive because your core values drive your decisions, how people actually do things and operate, right? And then so that means you, again, all that stuff needs to be visible. It needs to be, on your website or in your ads or a little both. And you need to talk about it when you're hiring. So classic, we ask you, why are you interested in working for us? Right. And what I'm looking for is like, well, I went to your website and I read about your mission, and that you help build high performing teams, right? And I think that's amazing. I love helping people. This one I was telling you about, the company we're hiring a sales manager. The guy, I think we found the guy, and that's part of what stood out. And in fact, we asked after we do our first interview, we say, look, I want you to go home, think about, we understand this is, a two-way decision. You're hopefully interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. And that's by the way, another mistake people make in hiring is it's all about what do we need? Can you do this? Can you do that? I need you this. No, to hire great teams and build teams, you have to have your interview process. Not even. I don't like using the word interview because you might as well put interrogate in there the way most people do it. But it should be a conversation, right, between the two of you and a back and forth exploration. We're exploring this opportunity together. Is this right for you? Is it right for us? And so we send them home after that interview. We say, look, go home, think about it, sleep on it, pray on it, talk to your spouse, your dog, whoever you confide in. I want you to really make sure, based on what we discussed today, that we are the right company and this is the right role for you. Then send me an email tomorrow morning by 9 o'clock. Tell me exactly what stood out about the opportunity, working with our company. Why do you want to be part of our team? And why should we select you based on what I told you, the results we need accomplished out of this role? So you've done a couple of things in doing that. Number one, you kind of put this back on them a little bit, right? By the way, give them this instruction and tell them, send this by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. One of the things you're testing there, if you will, is how coachable is this person? Will they actually do what I just asked them to do? And by the way, as a side note, above everything else in your hiring, you always need to be looking for, are they smart enough to learn what we have to teach them? Right? Because I don't care if they did the same job for a competitor down the road, they got to learn your stuff, right? Um, and they got to be coachable, which are two different things. You could be, a Mensa, smartest person in the world, but if you're not coachable, I can't teach you nothing. So that's a coaching kind of assignment. But what I'm looking for, right? Understand that's the thing. Anytime you ask a question or give a direction, you should have an idea of what you're looking for as a result. And what I'm looking for is send me that email by 9 o'clock, like I asked, but tell me specifically why you're interested. What I'm looking for is things like, hey, remember you talked a lot about the importance of your culture, with your mission, your vision, your values, and I'm excited about helping you accomplish that. I can, I'm passionate about helping people. So in other words, they will regurgitate a little bit about what you talked about was important. But of course, you got to be able to see past, are they just telling me what I want to hear, or is that really them? So that goes back to the interview, like, And you want to ask open-ended questions. So let's say, one of your core values is integrity, right? A lot of people have that, right? Well, first you have to define what does integrity mean for you and your company, right? Because what it means for you could be different than me, right? And you explain that, and then you ask the candidate. So based on what I just described integrity is for us, can you give me an example maybe when your integrity was in question? What was the situation and how did you, work around it? So ask them for specific examples of demonstrating those values in their own life, their own work. And then that's where you'll find out whether it's real or not, or they're just telling us what we want to hear.
I
So
love it.
pause there, covered a lot.
Yeah, no, that's great. It is true. It's like you're both kind of deciding, and when you step back and think about it, if you're building a company that'll be around for decades, there is a chance that you will have employees that are with you, longer than pets, right? So it's right. So they'll remember when you brought the puppy home and then, 15 years later or whatever. So that's hopefully a frame of what you're looking for is that's what you're looking for. You're looking for those long standing, high performing people who are going to evolve with you. So let's jump out of the interview now and let's talk about that other piece, your retention piece, because it's important enough that it's one third of the book system, right? Hire, train, retain. It wasn't hire, train, promote. It was retain. So, right? I mean, you could have done almost any other word there and it would have been fine, but retaining is obviously important. And, going back to this idea that you hire 230 people and you lose 170 within 6 months, wow. So let's talk about then the retention piece because I think that that might be another place where it needs to be that two-way thing and we don't. We sometimes allow the employee to just be like I'm out, peace.
Yep.
And there was maybe something we could have done about.
Right. So I'm going to go back and answer this, but the emphasis on the importance of a system, right?
Yes.
The people system can't operate in isolation. You can't have a hiring system that's not connected to how you onboard and train and develop people. They have to be attached. And then how you retain people should be connected to the hiring, the training, and the ongoing management day to day. So they all have to connect together. So give you an example. Focusing on retention when you're hiring, right? Look for patterns of why people leave. But also, I'll caution people: don't just look at a resume and go, "Oh, they're a job hopper. They're only staying a year and a half at each job for the last couple of years, so they're a flake." You
Right.
don't know until you talk to them, right?
Right.
Maybe the spouse was the primary breadwinner in their military, or they kept getting transferred with their job, right? Maybe they got laid off the last 3 times because just, bad luck of picking companies that were going under. So don't assume that, but you ask them. Tell me why, "Hey, you were at this job for a year and a half, it looked like from what you said you were doing really good, but you left. What happened? Why?" Right? And then ask them about the last 2 or 3 jobs and look for patterns, right? And if they don't give you good information, maybe they are a flake and a job hopper, but if they give you good explanations, now you gotta go deeper. So, fast forward to the end of the first interview. I always ask people this, I say, "Tell me in order of importance, the top 3 things that you're seeking in your next career move." Right? Tell me in order of importance, the top 3 things you're seeking in your next career move. What's gonna make you stick around with us for the long haul, right? And then listen intently to what they tell you, right? And then think about, can we provide those things? Because if you can't, then it's not if, it's when it's gonna fall apart,
Hmm.
right? So if they say, "I'm looking for stability," right? Well, how stable are you? Can you provide? And then ask them, "Well, what does that mean for you?" Right? Drill down. "I'm looking for, growth opportunities." By the way, that is the number one reason people leave jobs, and it's the key to retention is career growth, right? I felt there wasn't a future, there wasn't a career for us there, so I'm moving on, right? My boss kept saying, "We'll talk about it," and then it never happened, right? So so if they say, "Hey, I'm looking for growth," what does that mean to you? Ask deeper and then decide, can you provide that? Now, we're going to flip back the other side. you need to, one of the key elements that to keep people is you need to have defined career paths for every role in your company, right? And a lot of times people say, but you don't understand, Mike, we're a small company. We're only doing a couple billion and only have, 12 employees, right?
Right.
And we don't have all those different growth paths. Yes, you do. You got to think out of the box. So, so for example, you get creative with titles, right? So let's go back to the project manager. I'll use that one again. Like, let's say you need a project manager, right? And I need, that one that can start running jobs on their own within 30 to 60 days, right? Um, what I do though is I create a career path for project management that might start as a project manager trainee, right? So, hey, even though you've been a PM down the street for our competitor for the last 10 years doing the same stuff, you got to learn our stuff, right? So you're going to be a trainee for the first, 30, 60, 90 days. Um, and then you have to go back to the clarity. You have to demonstrate you can do these things in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, right? When you can demonstrate that to me, then you get your first promotion, which is project manager one, right? And then after that, you're going to be on a path for a project manager too, right? So, and that might come with a couple extra responsibilities, but it's definitely come with a little bit of a pay bump, right? To go with those responsibilities. Um, and then there needs to be clarity around what does excellence look like in that. And that way, every employee should always know what's next and how to get there. That is one of the keys to retention. But again, go back, it starts in the interview by asking that question, right? And another one would be like, I'm looking for flexibility, right? That's a big one we hear in today's world, work-life balance. Well, again, what does that mean? Because that might be different for you, right, than someone else. And again, whatever they tell you those three things are, you have to determine, can you provide those? And if you cannot provide those, I don't care how good they are, it's not if it's going to fall apart, it's when it will fall apart. And by the way, if they do, if you can provide those, then you need to let the candidate know. Oh, great. We can check all those boxes for you, Don, right? We have defined career paths, right? I can give you some examples. Let me talk about this guy. He started with us 10 years ago as a laborer. Now he's running our production department, right? So you need to kind of tell stories a little bit like that too that help. So, so those are some of the key things on the retention, the career paths. Start doing it in the hiring process, and then I'll give you a couple other key ones to it. In addition to having defined career paths, are you familiar with SHRM, Society for Human Resource
Yes,
Man?
yes, they've been sued, I'm aware. They've been recently sued a lot, so I'm going to say I am familiar with them, but I'm not having any opinion as I have read the multiple lawsuits, for sure. Yes, I have.
SHRM also does a lot of research and studies,
Right.
and over the last probably 10 or 15 years that I'm aware of, they have their research has proven that one of the number one contributors to retention are relationships with other employees.
Huh.
And with each additional relationship that they have, the retention gets stronger. And in fact, they even said, if they have at least 5 or more close relationships with other employees, they'll be more likely to turn down an offer if they get recruited by an outside firm. And I can speak to this, my
Wow.
wife, she was recruited, she was in banking for most of her career. And she, by the way, the bank community banks are familiar, they're always being bought out by other
Yeah.
banks. And so leadership changes, policies change. Well, when that happened, this one time she hated it. She went from loving the company and the job to hating it. And she'd come home every night, burnt out, tired, complaining. I was like, why don't you just leave? Put in your notice, right? I said, "You won't have any problem finding a job." And she says, "As you know, we are in the middle of implementing a new online banking system. And if I leave now, I will be letting down my team. And I cannot do that to them."
Right.
And that's an example of how those relationships, which means in your onboarding. So again, your onboarding now leading to retention. One of the first things you should work on in that first couple of days, particularly the first week on the job, is build relationships with as many other employees as possible. Right. And not just the superficial, hey, I'm Mike, I'm in charge of marketing. Right. It's like, no, hey, this is who I am. This is how long I've been with the company. By the way, Don, this is why I love working here. And now let me tell you a little bit about myself personally. When I'm not at work, I'm married, I got a couple of older kids. I'm hoping that they'll give me some grandkids soon. I got a couple of dogs, cats. We love to boat and hang out with our friends and cook. And that's how you get to know people. And by going through an introduction like that, they're going to find synergy. Oh, I also love, to cook, or I love to boat, or I have 5 grandkids, and stuff. It's great. Can't wait till you get them. That's how relationships are formed. So you've got to be purposeful about how you build those relationships. But it's one of the most important things in the first couple of days, because not only does it lead to retention, it leads to collaboration.
Right.
And to be a high performing team, they have to be collaborative. And they're not going to collaborate if they don't know who these other people are. Right.
Very true.
So,
Very true. All right. So that's a huge takeaway, that retention actually starts from the resume and the interview. I think that's a huge takeaway here, and definitely some ahas, and hopefully the audience as well. I always forget to tell you, if you like this discussion, subscribe, but I want to hear your comments about, do you actually start thinking about employee retention when you're doing those first interviews? I have actually never heard this perspective before, honestly. And we have a team of 8. So I now have to go and look at that, because I think sometimes we hire intuitively, or we hire because it's pressure, or we hire because someone has a skill set. And I don't know that we actually do the really good systemization that is so important. So where can people find you and get your book? Because you're going to want to read the book, and start to learn about this system that's going to make their people issues go away.
check. So the book is called Hire, Train, Retain. All right. For people looking, that's the book. Right. It's a short read. I purposely made it short and concise, because people's short attention spans these days are really small. In fact, I went through a workshop years ago where a guy was talking to a bunch of professional speakers and stuff, that were getting ready to write their first book. And he pointed out, he goes, how many of you, have bought more than 5 books in the last year? Right. And everyone's hand went up, right? How many bought more than 10? Right. Then he went back and he said, how many of you have read, even half of the books you bought? Right. And he kept narrowing it down to where, okay, people are good at buying books, but they're not as good as actually reading them. So he said, leave out all the, particularly from a business, not talking fiction, right? Business,
Right. Business.
keep it short, keep it concise, leave the fluff out, get right to the point. So that's how I wrote this book. It's on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon and just, Google hire train, or put in search hire train retain, get a copy there. My website, you can learn more about what we do. By the way, we also, in our talent system, we have those defined career paths. We already built a whole library of them, that all you got to do is select and edit them with your content. And that's part of what we help our clients do through what we call our talent mastery program, which we implement over a 90-day period. So at our website, XP3, the number 3, talent.com is where they can learn more there. And if they want to reach out to me directly and set up a meeting, or do a conversation, I love helping people. So, no obligation discussion, that you can email me directly at mike@xp3talent.com.
Perfect. All right. We're going to put all that down inside the show notes, including the link to Amazon. So if you find us on the day that this episode launches, or if you find it 2 or 3 years later, because we're seeing that now, which is really cool, you can still get the information. You can download the things. You can connect with Mike. So thank you so much for this conversation and for this perspective. I have to ask, because I'll be up all night thinking about it. After you helped that one company, were they receptive to maybe putting in some managerial layers, or maybe a director or 2, or a CFO?
Oh, yeah, yeah. We
Oh,
we
okay.
we actually, first thing we did is built a leadership team, and we actually promoted one of their sales managers to VP of sales.
Nice.
That process, we assessed to figure out they actually had what it took, and figured out what they didn't know as well, right? So we knew I need to coach and mentor to get that person to the next level. We hired a VP of marketing. Most importantly, we hired a CFO who immediately dismissed that other guy was talking about, and then built a whole accounting team, realizing that, hey, it's at this level, we need probably 5 or 6 people in accounting, not one guy.
That's a lot of zeros for one guy. That's all that's just a lot of zeros.
And by the way, so again, in 6 months, right? So we started working with them in June. The company broke 100 million that year, um, but profitably, most importantly. And we opened up actually in February, then so a couple months later, we opened up their 5th location, which we had set a goal of doing 5 million for the year at this new location. And we did that in the first 5 months of opening that office, because now we knew how to put the right people in place, building that team who can execute on the great system that they had for marketing and selling. So,
Man, I was like,
and by the way, most importantly, we got that 80% turnover
yeah.
down to 23%.
Okay. I would have been awake all night wondering, and I probably would have emailed you separately and been like, just tell me the rest of the story because I want to hear these great companies and anybody who can get to that level as a scrappy startup and whatever. I mean, applause for the economics and the jobs that are built and the passions being pursued. But longevity and durability do demand that you do kind of do things at certain points in business. So I thank you for telling us the rest of the story. All right.
Pleasure.
Well,
Thank you for having me today. It's been fun.
it has. It's really been great, and I appreciate your time. And please go grab a copy of the book. And again, think about your retention at the interview stage. I have to go sit with that actually myself. So we'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to dawnkennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube, as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.